thinking about what was the inspiration for bioRxiv is that sort of, I mean, obviously we were aware of arXiv, for a long time, and there'd been conversations that had been happening within the biomedical community for years and years and years about whether or not this could work in biology. At Cold Spring Harbor, we thought, well, really, the time is right for this. And when you spoke to people who were biologists who used to be physicists or mathematicians, they said, this is nonsense, exactly the same. There's no fundamental difference in culture. This can totally work in biology.
And I think there is a famous quote from Paul that no community that started using, no subfield that started using preprints has ever gone back, right? So once you try it, everybody realizes how valuable this is.
I mean, the author control is so key. I mean, I feel like that is still one of the main features that is so powerful, right? It's the people who know the work best can make sure that it sees the light of day when they're ready for people to see it. And that is just so compelling that, that to not have to have a small number of gatekeepers decide when something becomes public.
I think the last year and change has made it really evident that there are circumstances under which speed is genuinely a matter of life and death, right? And if all the COVID papers, not that there weren't issues along the way, but if everybody had to wait until all of those papers were peer-reviewed and published, like the pandemic would be over before anybody could learn the lessons of any of the studies anybody was doing, right?
I mean, it really makes a good case for public review, right? To just have those comments posted, right? Because there's a lot of, even people who are fans of preprints still don't totally understand. They say, well, why can't I just privately send my comments? And it just really makes the case that sometimes, I mean, especially for the readers and especially if it's work that's important to a broad audience, it really helps to have everyone be able to see it. Now, it doesn't mean that all of the comments are necessarily going to be, right on target, but to have the public conversation, to be able to have even authors come back and say, I disagree with this, but to have it be open is just so important. And I feel like that case is sometimes lost.
What's often happened with the discussion around preprints and critiques of papers on blogs and Twitter and all of this stuff is what I learned is that biologists are very polite compared to physicists. And in physics, there has always been a very robust culture of criticism, right? If somebody posts a preprint on arXiv and it's flawed, every senior person in that field will very publicly point out that it's flawed, right? And so a lot of stuff just never sees light of day, or people have an incentive not to put up bad work. And if they do, I mean, there is a reputational cost, and everybody knows what's bad, right?
Paul Ginsburg wrote a great sort of fact on the sort of frequently asked questions of arXiv by biologists, and I always point people to that, because there's this question where people say, oh, does this mean that you're going to get all sorts of garbage on the server and people are going to try and put up shoddy work? And Paul makes the great point that your reputation is the only thing that you've got in academia. It's so important. And so you may get some stuff, but anybody who's serious, anybody who really wants to advance and be part of academic culture is not going to put stuff up like that, because the last thing that you want is to get this rep for being the individual who puts out shoddy work. Somebody wrote an editorial in a clinical journal saying, that this approach of arXiv and bioRxiv was a bad idea because you get these crummy papers. And he pointed to this paper and he said, this is the example of the kind of crummy work that appears on a preprint server. And then finally, I kind of looked at it, and then I actually saw on Twitter, somebody made the point, I can't remember their words, they said something like, the argument is not so subtly undermined by the fact that by the time the editorial was published, the article on the preprint server had appeared in a journal unchanged. So whatever flaws it were may well have been there, but they certainly weren't being removed by the traditional system. And then this thing which I wouldn't have imagined 3 years before, but the biggest clinical trials of treatments for COVID-19 coming out in medRxiv saying treat people with dexamethasone, it works. Don't treat people with hydroxychloroquine, it doesn't work.
All of the things that people are concerned about, it's just even more important that those things are open, public, fast, and available to everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's sort of people worry about scooping, and I'm like, how can people scoop you if you made it public and everybody knows, right? If somebody then, publishes a paper 3 months later, it's clear and a matter of record that you did it first.
As we build a more robust culture of public feedback, it's going to become less and less important that we are so married to the way that we do it now.
I think the preprints are going to get further divorced from kind of the rigid article format of one-time publication of a big unit all the time. The author's job is to do the work, vet it, to their own satisfaction, and put it out there in public on the preprint server. And then the process of evaluation, further vetting, dissemination, et cetera, should be played by somebody else.
I had that experience with a graduate student of mine where we had posted a preprint months ago, and we had gotten the feedback, and we'd done a revision, and we sent it to the journal, and there was no stress. We've already there was just no anxiety about this at all, and I told her, I said, back in the day, we used to, not know what was coming back from the journal. It would be like this surprise. And she said, oh, that sounds horrible. And it was just, she's only known because she's only ever been in our lab, and this is the only way we've ever done it. And it was just truly beautiful. It was a beautiful moment.
It's going to be like that conversation you have with, like I had with sort of teenagers, and they say, and I say, when I was a teenager, there were no cell phones. And they're like, oh my God, I can't imagine what that was like, and so now you'll have young investigators, and you say, when I was a young investigator, there were no preprints. So
I think we're not that far off from that point. I think we're not that far off.